attorney. So without further ado, are you ready to kick it off? Shall we kick it off?
Let's do this.
Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us here today. Look, I'm going to be really honest with you. We've seen not just a rise in conversations lately, but ever since March, like Paige talked about when we joined forces for our first of many webinars and conversations, we've just seen a rise in conversations and questions and concerns regarding reopening your business and sort of the legal parameters around that. And even looking in the chat, just like Paige mentioned, everyone joining this call is coming from different locations. So your circumstances are different. The way your clients feel about reopening is different. And we just want to respect wherever you are and wherever your clients are in this process. Because ultimately at HoneyBook, at Rising Tide, we believe that people come first. And so we're committed to supporting you as a business owner and the larger creative economy in navigating these really difficult situations. And so with these rising questions around reopening, around safety in the workplace and how to navigate secondary and third, rounds of reschedules, which none of us ever thought we'd have to deal with, as some locations are seeing a second surge, we wanted to get an opportunity to sit down with Paige and kind of like continue this conversation that we've been having now throughout the pandemic, because ultimately her advice has helped to really, I'll be honest, like save countless businesses in this season. And just thank you, Paige, for joining us. And for those of you who don't know who Paige is, I just want to give a little intro before we kick it off with questions. Paige Griffith is the founder of The Legal Page, a virtual law firm working with online businesses and wedding industry professionals. She's a certified Juris Doctor, barred in the state of Montana, and holds a double BA in economics and political science. After working as a federal law clerk, Paige traded in the traditional law life for a virtual one and opened the doors to The Legal Page in 2018. She helps her clients run legal and protected businesses and counsels them on issues related to contracts, intellectual property, privacy, and business law. She's worked with Jasmine Starr, HoneyBook, Adventure Instead, Hope Taylor, Davey and Krista, Colleen Christensen of No Food Rules, Jennifer Anderson of Kids Eat in Color, and dozens more. Her mission is to create an online space where the law isn't so scary and entrepreneurs can get legally legit in no time. Paige, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me. I gave a little intro at the beginning, so hello to everyone who's just jumping on. I am here from Montana. That is actually where I live, if you can believe it. Yes, people live in Montana. And I always just want to give a little legal disclaimer before we get started, especially because there are so many people here from various places in the United States with various types of businesses and various types of client situations. So just know that I am an attorney. I am extremely well-versed in the wedding and event industry and contract law, but I am not your attorney. So specific questions that you have related to your business, I would definitely suggest that you seek out an attorney in your state and specifically in your county right now, because sometimes that's even more important because they know the specifics of what's going on with your local county regulations and policies surrounding COVID-19. I can really give good general suggestions to all of you, but just know that while I'm an attorney, I'm not yours. That's just a legal disclaimer I always have to give to everybody.
Perfect. And can we start where we've started every webinar together? I feel like that literally this is a question I start every webinar with. And actually I might even have you redefine what force majeure is, but let's kick it off with this question. Are we still or are we in force majeure land? And maybe for those who aren't sure what force majeure means, quick definition for those folks who are new.
Yeah, so force majeure means of superior strength. So when something happens of superior strength, that's kind of outside of your control or your client's control, really the party's control to the contract, whomever is signing both sides of the contract, if there's two or more parties. If something were to happen, you can contract and write a clause in your contract that's usually force majeure. Sometimes, you guys, the heading says act of God, and that's totally fine. I would probably switch it to force majeure at this point, just because it kind of encapsulates more than just act of God situations. But it's your ability and your client's ability to negotiate in your contract what would happen if one of those situations occur, and you guys can figure out what what constitutes a non-breach of contract in that situation? Can you terminate the contract? Can you not perform if an act of God happens, like a hurricane? Usually was where these clauses kind of came from, really bad weather situations that were act of God. And now, of course, COVID is a huge part of a force majeure legal spiel nowadays. Everyone's heard about this a ton. Natalie's asking, are we still in force majeure land? I've talked about this now since March, just heavily. And it's interesting because it's changing so drastically. I would say right now, likely not. Pursuant to the majority of your guys' contracts, okay? Again, I don't know what your language says in your contract. I don't even know if you have a force majeure clause. But if you do, the likelihood that it was kind of more general, terms and language within that clause is probably high, because we all didn't know we needed to make a carve out for epidemics and pandemics and all these different things. Now we do know that. And so because force majeure was an issue, and I would say March and April most heavily, beginning of May in some states, and that was because states were shut down, venues were shut down, nobody could leave their homes. And so the main phrasing you guys need to remember, I know HoneyBook and Rising Tide has put out tons of valuable resources to this effect, but the terms unpredictable, unforeseeable, and impossible are really important for construing force majeure clauses. Now, what do I mean by that? Unpredictable means none of the parties at the time of contracting could predict that X thing was going to happen, and now it's kind of impacting the contract in one way or the other. Unforeseeable. Nobody could foresee this situation. And of course, the big one here is impossibility. So force majeure is really you can't perform. There's no way to perform. Even if you tweak your performance a little bit or host your event a little bit differently, then it would be a force majeure situation. Now, May and June, states started reopening. And so government shutdowns and stay-at-home orders were no longer in place to make hosting the event impossible. Again, that's why I tried to really flesh that out for you guys, those three terms, when you're looking at a force majeure clause. So you have to remember that it has to deal with performance on both sides. You guys, HoneyBook and I created a really awesome force majeure clause. I'm always just pointing people to it because it's free. So go to their blog. They have it. I'm sure HoneyBook will send out the link to all of you guys. I'm sure Kate will post it here. I'm sure somebody will post the link. But we created one that's really, really good, kind of all-inclusive for, of course, future situations, right? You probably didn't have this clause in your contract previously. So this is good for new bookings that you have. You want to make sure it's two-sided. So either party can terminate performance or terminate the contract in the event of a force majeure situation. And then, of course, at the end of that clause, I always make a caveat. I actually read a really interesting case today. And if you guys go to my Instagram account, I put it up on my Instagram stories. And courts are now construing force majeure clauses in terms of what you do with retainers and deposits and fees paid. And there was an actual case in Hawaii that just got denied summary judgment. I'm going to stop with the legal mumbo jumbo for you all. But the court was ultimately saying, okay, this force majeure clause says you could terminate the contract, stop performance. And it had to do with an actual event in Hawaii in March, which I was like, okay, courts are actually looking at these now. But the court said that because the clause said nothing regarding payments within the clause, what do you do with fees paid? What happens to this deposit or retainer if a force majeure event were to happen? The court said that it doesn't automatically mean that a refund is supposed to be issued with a force majeure situation. So that being said, likely not in force majeure land right now because COVID's pretty foreseeable, pretty predictable at this point, and it's not impossible to host your event. I know some of you are probably from places like New York City, California. Those force majeures may still be an issue, right? It's impossible to host your event. But for the majority of the United States, force majeure land probably isn't happening. Just remember, like when you get that clause from HoneyBook, kind of at the end, put in your policies regarding what happens to fees paid, because now courts are really looking at that. They want it to be specifically delineated in your force majeure clause. They're not just going to go straight to your cancellation and rescheduling policy, because those are totally different. Now, Natalie, one more thing I'm going to add here as a caveat. If your state goes backward, all right, because lots of people are thinking now, okay, we're in like phase 2, phase 3 in some places, whatever protocols your governors in your state have put in place, there is kind of this foreseeability and possibility that we could go backwards. Like gatherings could be reduced in size due to this new community spread that is occurring and spike in cases. So force majeure could happen in the future. The one thing I will say, and I know this is kind of a gray area, is there is some legal perspectives out there that are saying that even if a potential shutdown occurs, that that's probably foreseeable to many people. And so there is that, you know, kind of defense and arguments that can be made on your side as a vendor that it was still foreseeable that this would occur. At the end of the day, I always say try to negotiate and work with your clients as much as possible during these crazy trying times. And, you know, it's fact and circumstance based. It's based on where you're at, not only what your state regulations are, but what your county regulations are as well. My best answer here is we're not in a majority of circumstances in force majeure land anymore. We're in kind of cancellation and rescheduling policy land.
Okay, amazing. And I even saw, as you were talking, a bunch of our attendees were sharing, like Rebecca said, in LA, you're still not allowed to gather with anyone outside of your immediate household. So that might be different than somebody, let's say, in Montana that maybe could host an event, or in the state of Maryland where our numbers have been, I hope they continue going down. And I know there are weddings happening with over 100 people in a couple weeks. So again, like all within the state guideline, but state by state, this is a very kind of local issue. And the guidelines.
Yeah, New York and California in general really haven't left March and April positioning for any of their state guidelines. There may have been just like some tweaks, right? Like what restaurants are opening, people can do things outside. But for the most part, they haven't even left the yes, we're in force majeure land situation, but the other states probably.
Yeah, and Courtney adds here, she's a venue owner in Florida. She says the state seems to be going backward, and we've all heard about the surge in cases there. Yeah. And again, complicated state. So it is very, very local to each location. I do just want to let everyone know, Paige's Instagram is @TheLegalPage. I think I saw 2 or 3 of you ask where her Instagram is, so that after this you can check her out. And I just want to shout it out from the start here. Let's keep going with questions. There are 2 scenarios that I keep seeing. I've seen it in multiple Facebook groups. We've heard about it from our leaders, and we even talked, Paige and I kind of briefly talked about it before this call, just because it's so complicated. But I wanted to ask these questions because I have a feeling some of you might have them as well. So here's the scenario. I'm going to read 2 specific questions. So the first question is, my clients are having a wedding with way more guests than is allowed according to my local or state guidelines, and I don't want to do the event out of concerns for my safety. Similar secondary question that we received is, what if I show up to an event and guests are not abiding by state guidelines? So they're not wearing masks, or they're not physically distancing, or I even saw I even saw one right before this call that asked the question, what if I show up to an event that I was told had 50 people per state guidelines, and there are 200 people at this event? And I feel unsafe in the workplace. What do I do? Like, what do you do at that point? So I know it's complicated, but I had to ask.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked. Natalie and I have been talking about this, you guys, for the past couple of days. I have been on phone calls and messaging back and forth with a lot of my legal colleagues in the industry. The best way to approach this is to just start off by saying it is tricky. It's tricky for a multitude of reasons, because everyone's situation is different in terms of not only what their clients are telling them and talking to them and responding to them in a certain manner, but also what your contract said that you signed, right? Probably last year with them. So let's just go through some things you need to consider. And I always suggest, and you guys, this is what lawyers do all day long. We do risk assessment. Okay. So like, is it worth it to do X? Okay. And is it more risky to do this? Should you do this? If you guys don't have a safe working environment clause in your contract, please, please, please go get one. That is because a lot of us didn't know that we needed one in our contracts. My little legal heart is pretty happy because people are now realizing the importance of contracts, unfortunately, due to this global pandemic. But I think it's really going to serve basically every small business better in the future for whatever may come our way post 2020. But a safe working environment clause is pretty necessary to put in your contract now, because it allows you to like cancel services or terminate services without it being a breach of contract, because you've put it in your contract that it isn't, and your clients understand and agree that due to safety concerns, due to you deciding under your sole discretion that this specific area has been deemed unsafe due to probably a communicable disease in this specific circumstance. Or say, I've had situations where people have told me, like at elopements or something like that, people have brought firearms with them. Like all these type of unsafe working conditions that we can think about specifically related to weddings and events and conferences and those types of things, you want to be able to get out of and probably keep all fees paid as liquidated damages at that point. So that is a really important clause to have. Now, if you didn't have that clause in your contract, just kind of disregard what I'm going to say here because I'm going to tell you other things you need to consider. But if you do have that, then that's probably the leg you need to stand on regarding, okay, my clients are asking me to do something like totally above and beyond the state's guidelines and my local county guidelines as well. And so you would probably be able to get out of your contract if you had that specific language in your contract. Obviously, what Natalie's primarily asking me here is, okay, lots of you don't have this in your contract. If you don't have one, here's some things that you should probably look at. You guys can write this down. I'm sure there'll be a replay, so you can just write more notes down. But is there a way to work with your clients to reduce the size of the event? Usually there's not, because they're kind of like, we don't care. We're just going to continue to host this event the way that we want to. So then I would suggest, maybe you do a couple more steps as a vendor. Have you called the local county health department regarding the matter? Lots of people are kind of terrified to do that, but at least that takes it out of your hands, puts it in the local county health department's hands, and then they have the power to contact these venues. Because venues and the location that it's at is kind of most liable for what's happening regarding the safety of a larger gathering. You as a vendor are just there to perform your services. You're not there to enforce the policies that have been put in place by your state and your local county. So the other thing that I just want you all to consider as well, I've heard this through various forums, and something we all need to be aware of is, and lots of small businesses are dealing with this, not just us, is what is happening with enforcement in your area. And I think we all forget about that. We all want to follow the rules, the recommendations, the guidelines to the best of our ability. But just because the governor puts that out or your local county puts that out, is the sheriff's department or the police department actually enforcing that? That's something that I would check with your county on. This isn't going to be at a state level. It's definitely going to be at a county level. So are there fines that have been put in place? Are there ordinances and regulations that have actually been formed by your police department? Are they enforcing this? That's a big risk factor to consider. I think you, of course, tell your clients, we're going to get into this a little bit later, what your policies are, how you're going to abide by these guidelines as much as possible. But the fact of the matter here is we're trying to control other people and what they're doing, and you can only do what you can do as a vendor at a wedding or event right now. And so if the risk isn't that high of you getting fined, or that's not even occurring in your like local area, definitely something to consider. Of course, have they signed a waiver? Like that's just also something that we all need to be doing. So if you're just really feeling antsy about participating in these situations, your safety at an event, your liability and risk at an event, have them sign a release and waiver of liability that they are assuming all the risks involved right now with participating at a larger gathering, with COVID-19 still being an issue and close in-person contact. And then if you can't, all in all, find a solution here, are still fearful of being at the event that is going forward, and happening regardless of all of the efforts that you tried. That's why I'm trying to give you guys some things to consider, things to do. Try your best and use your due diligence to do XYZ. Always document it. You guys know, if you've heard me talk before, I'm all about email communication. Keep that email string. Don't just talk to them on the phone or text them. Put that in very specific email terms, what you're doing, how you've contacted the local county health department, those type of things. Make sure that they sign the waiver. And then, you probably may get to this point. There's some of you out there who are a little more risk averse, and there are some people who are more risky as business owners. And we have to remember, restaurants are opening right now with the fear that they could get shut down, right? If their employee tests positive for COVID-19, usually that's a for sure shutdown of your restaurant until you have the health department come in and their sanitation and all these things get taken care of. We're kind of doing that as business owners right now. We, if you want to protect the financial stability and viability of your business, we are unfortunately having to put ourselves in these situations. You can do what you can do control-wise to protect yourself, right? And we're going to get into that second question here in a second, which is a good transition. But just know that if you're at the end of the day just being like, I'm not going to go there, I'm not going to perform, I don't really have anything in my contract that allows me to cancel with me retaining all fees paid, I think it would be very, very difficult for a court in that circumstance to say, they have to pay you the remaining amount under the contract or all of these different things. I would try to come to a mutual resolution with your clients. And if not, you would probably be canceling on your clients at that point, which is probably not fun for you guys to hear. But I think it's the reality of this situation. And some of us really need to hear that from an attorney. If you are not willing to assume the risks yourself as the business owner, then you're probably looking at a cancellation contract, canceling those services with your client. Hopefully you two can come to some agreement where you're keeping at least some of the fees paid, of course, for all the services you've performed thus far. But in that situation, honestly, the risk of thinking about they're threatening to sue you. I've heard all these crazy things coming up on forums, probably just cancel, move on with your life. You've got other clients, you're jeopardizing your own health. Your other weddings that are coming up for the next 2 weeks as well are probably more important, and they're going to follow the guidelines and put you and your business at less risk than this one. So just something to consider. Now, Natalie, do you want me to continue with that second question here?
Before we jump to that second question, because I actually, even what you just said about, well, then if you get exposed, there's a whole domino effect that occurs after. We had some really great questions pop up live in relation to one thing that you said. So Nancy asks, for weddings and events still going forward in 2020, how do we create a safe working environment clause, in a waiver for our clients? And do guests need to sign this when they arrive? What I want to kind of hone in on here is you talked about a liability waiver.
Yeah.
So is that something that if you are currently operating a business right now, you've reopened and you're hosting events again, that you would recommend that people are sending out some kind of liability waiver of some kind? Would it include this, or could it include this safe working environment clause if you didn't originally have it? And then final question, it was a lot, but do you have one on your website that people can purchase, or a place where we can direct them to go?
Yeah. Okay. So you guys, there's kind of multiple thoughts on this. I have a very specific thought process behind waivers. I'm all for waivers. I think that they give you an actual document where clients are assuming the risk, they've signed off on it. Okay. There's this legal thought in our legal world regarding like waivers aren't necessary and people are assuming the risk no matter what. That's totally fine if you fall in that, frame of mind. But I think, why wouldn't you double cover yourself and have them sign a simple one-pager waiver? These obviously come after your contract, right? Because you've already signed your contract with your clients regarding all your services and, all those necessary, we call them like general provisions or essential clauses that need to be in your contract. So a waiver, people have asked me this, can you put it in your contract? I think that they should be separate. I think it should be a separate 4-corner document, super simple, that you just have them sign related to COVID-19 purposes only, that they are aware of the risk, assuming the risk, and releasing your business from any liability related to someone getting sick or you getting sick or, all of these things. And then indemnifying you for any guest situations. So people ask, do guests need to sign all of this? Well, that's kind of cumbersome, and I doubt that that's ever going to happen. I think venues are a different animal in terms of venue owners. So if you're a venue owner, probably, post something regarding your policies surrounding COVID-19 or have, a procedure in place. This is where venues really need to talk to an attorney in their local area because it's so specific with places of assembly in various areas of the country on what you can and cannot do. The main thing is to get your clients to sign, the ones hosting the event, that they won't take action against you, so on and so forth. At this point, we haven't seen anybody really take action or suing vendors or venues for getting COVID-19, but there's that fear right now. And of course, it's a what if situation that could occur in the future. And so just protect yourself with a waiver. Safe working environment clause, though, isn't really something you would put in a COVID waiver because safe working environment, like I talked about previously, deals with all kinds of unsafe working conditions. And that's one of those general provisions you need in your contract. So you can always just add that in as a contract addendum. And that's probably something that would be really easy and simple for your clients to sign, and they would fully understand why you're putting it in your contract at this point. People have asked me, like, can you update force majeure clauses? Can you change your cancellation and rescheduling policies? That's a little stickier because I think it gives clients heartache that you're like trying to change those provisions that may protect them at this point. So you can always try to amend your contract, you guys. You have the power as the business owner to send out contract addendums. Remember, addendum means you're amending or modifying some part of your contract. You put in that you're amending the original contract. You put in your little safe working environment clause. You say all other provisions in the contract remain in full force and effect, and you have them sign it at the bottom and you have you sign it. So it's just like a tack on, right? Like you're stapling it to your original contract. But a waiver is really just for like illness, death, medical things that could occur related to COVID-19 with you participating as a vendor. For venues, you guys, again, just trying to clear the air here. It's a little bit more tricky for venues. So I am working specifically with like venues in Montana. I'm in close contact with all the county health departments, and they're all doing things differently, which is interesting. And then the governor's office, I'm like on the phone with them all the time. So you have to realize that attorneys sometimes have a little bit more power or connection to kind of get things done or get answers a little more quickly, which is where if you're a venue, it's probably best right now to assess those risks by utilizing an attorney in your area. So that's kind of both questions. I think I answered those. The last one was, do I have them in my shop? Yes, we have waivers. People have used them quite frequently right now. So there's different ones. We have one for like weddings and events. And then we have one for like single service providers as well, like hairstylists, makeup artists who are kind of opening their salons or their businesses and are in close person-to-person contact, massage therapists, those type of things for entrepreneurs. And then we have one for family photographers as well. I know that's kind of specific, but it's a little different because you're going to have like the parent or legal guardian sign on behalf of the entire family, and you need to list all those people.
Fantastic. And Kate dropped a link to your shop in the chat for anybody that wants to get access to those documents. And someone, Samantha said, I got Paige's COVID waiver. It's amazing. So I love that, and completely agree. I think that this advice is so important. Now, we got a couple people that were asking specifically around venues. So a lot of venues are not public, they're private.
Yes.
Does that affect force majeure or safe working environment clauses, or these because I also saw some people saying government ordinances that say how does that private aspect impact things?
Yeah, it may impact it. This is a huge discussion going on right now in my community on Facebook too, with private versus public events. Obviously, there's definitely exceptions to the general rule. When the governor of your state starts mandating what's happening in indoor public places. Thus, an indoor private location is different. And your venue will know this, and your venue, I am positive, is likely talking to somebody about what they can and cannot do as a private location. They can't be on public land. They can't be utilizing public land. It has to be all private and probably by invitation only for it to be a full private event. However, I have seen that has not necessarily deemed that you can go above and beyond what the gathering maximum limit is. Sometimes though, they will give a specific, I have a venue that I've worked with where the local county health department has given an exception to the rule based on the facts and circumstances of their venue being primarily outdoors. And, instead of 50 people maximum, they can have 50 households. So 4 people could count as one person. These are all things to consider when you are a venue. What can you do to try to get someone to say you could do this? That would be different than your government protocols or guidelines or recommendations, just so that you have some official person telling you that you can do it.
Perfect. Fantastic. All right, let's keep moving forward because we have a lot of really good questions here. So what happens if you get sick and you can't perform your service? What if you actually get COVID-19, or let's say you wake up the day before an event and you have all the symptoms, you're coughing and you have a fever and you're having difficulty breathing. What happens then?
Well, yes, I think we all know, probably go get tested, right? So do your due diligence as a business owner, just as you had a boss and you were an employee working for someone, what would you need to do to ensure that you are keeping your, job, more or less, and being really upfront in communication with all of your clients. So first thing is likely to go get tested as quickly as possible. That whoever that healthcare professional is that you work with will tell you what you need to do. They're of course going to ask you where you've been, all of these different things. And then if you have been at a wedding or a larger gathering, there are community spread guidelines in place from local county health departments regarding who you need to contact, when you need to contact them. Do they contact the venue and then the venue sends it out? Do you? So on and so forth. So just know that your first step is go get tested. When you do come back, if you do come back positive, then of course you need to look at what's happening for the next 14 days. And of course your healthcare professional is going to tell you all of these things as well. Right now though, I would suggest risk assessment wise and legal wise, keep communication lines open with all of your clients. Tell them what's going, people are asking this. Clients are well, what happens if you get sick a week before my wedding? What are you going to do? So maybe make some, progress on that front. Find some replacements for yourself. Get 3 to 5 different people in your area that could take your place if you were to get sick. And then if you can't find a replacement or you need to cancel because you are sick, you are probably looking at a cancellation agreement situation with refunding because you can't perform your services. And again, I'm trying to really relay to all of you that this is the risk of doing business right now. So we all need to be prepared for those risks and aware of them. And that's why I'm like replacements, like subcontract out your work if at all possible. Mitigating circumstances is really important here, and it's a factor that courts are going to consider. Your clients may be like a little dicey or upset to begin with, right? But if you explain to them that these are your policies, this is what you've done for all of your clients, if this were to occur, they'll come down from where they were at. And you're doing the best you can as a business owner right now, if that were to occur. Now, Natalie, I know people have also asked about like what happens if you're not abiding by state guidelines, right? So you get to a wedding or event and then they're not wearing masks, they're not social distancing, and then you are at a higher risk of getting sick. So again, just remember what is mandated, okay? There are guidelines and recommendations that have been put into place. Those are guidelines. You can't force another third party to do something. You can only control yourself and your business actions. But if it's mandated, like you have to wear a mask indoors, then that's something that you need to work with kind of all the vendors on at that point. I would say probably don't be the one person that's like telling people what to do. Try to find the authority figure in the room of the venue and let them take control of that, because they probably have policies and procedures in place for that situation. Again, unfortunately for all of you venues here that are listening, we do put a lot of onus on you as the place that is hosting this assembly or larger gathering. So you are probably going to be the one in charge. If your vendor's listening, just know that that's the person you should go to in these situations. If masks are mandated indoors and there aren't people, wearing masks. Again, though, like social distancing, if people aren't social distancing, I mean, I have like yet to hear somebody getting a ticket for not being 6 feet apart from everybody. I think that's more of a guideline still and recommendation. So do your best as a business owner and wear your mask, bring your sanitation, all of everything that you need to bring as a business owner. Try to stay 6 feet away from everybody if at all possible. Try not to like get on the dance floor and like put yourself in that situation where you're risking your health, your family's health, and your, future clients' health as well. And yeah, just remember that you're a business owner, and you need to do what you need to do, but you can't control other people.
Yes. Let's continue with that thought process. So what happens if someone is sick at a wedding or event that you're supposed to work at?
Yes.
Or, like we've talked about, and I saw a couple people like asking this, but like, oh, what if you're exposed to COVID? And like, what do you do at that point? There are a lot of concerns obviously around that, because everything that got rescheduled from the spring, a lot of it got kind of stacked is like what we like to, so it used to be you had one for every Saturday, but now you have a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So you could show up on a Friday, get exposed to COVID, shoot through the weekend or work through the weekend or floral design through the weekend, and get a call on Monday saying you've been exposed. Is there anything that maybe we should be thinking about as business owners? I know you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe to like ribbon it up, tie it in a bow for us.
Yeah. First things first, communicate with all your clients. I know HoneyBook has great email templates for you guys to use. You could just tweak those and modify them pursuant to what your local guidelines are and your state guidelines are, and how you are going to abide by them by the best of your ability as a business owner. What are you going to do? Are you going to always stay 6 feet apart? Are you from everybody? Like even, the clients, the spouses, if you're at a wedding, are you always going to wear a mask? Or are there situations where you won't wear a mask? Like you wear them indoors, but outdoors, like when you're shooting or something like that, if you're a photographer on here, what are your policies? Be upfront at the beginning, and that will facilitate the conversation with your clients. If they have follow-up questions regarding, okay, what happens with this? What happens with this? At least you're in email communication with them. Second thing, get a waiver. just have them sign a waiver. That's like step number 2 of everything. Tell them you're reopened for business. Here's what you're trying to do. You're going to do the best that you can, but nobody has any idea where they're getting COVID, okay? So even if you could have been exposed, there's always that argument that could be made that you didn't get it at the wedding, and maybe you got it on the Sunday at a gas station. So there's no real trace to where you got COVID. But as we all know, weddings and events are starting to be pinpointed for community spread. So really, really important for you all to maintain a safe distance. Tell your clients that you're doing that and that you're wearing a mask if at all possible. I would just suggest that because you're going to get into tricky and sticky legal situations and contract situations with future clients if that were to happen. And then, of course, Natalie, like you said, what do you do if you get that call on Monday? First things first, just tell your healthcare provider or the person that's on the phone with you at that time, this is what I do for a living. This is where I've been. And how do I need to effectively communicate with either my clients or what should I tell them? Just be very proactive. What should I tell my clients in regards to the wedding that I was at on Friday? And then I also was at an event on Sunday. Do all these people need to be, told what's happening? And they will give you the answer. So just take a deep breath that you will just follow whatever your healthcare professional tells you to do, because those are changing all the time too, you guys. Their protocols and guidelines regarding community spread are changing quite drastically day in and day out as this spike in cases is happening.
Amazing. Okay. Well, not amazing, but you know what I mean. Good to have an answer. I feel like, all right. Continuing forward. Here's another question that we're seeing a lot. And we've talked about waivers. We've talked about that as an aspect of this season, but what if you're the vector, you're the one that exposes somebody else to COVID through your business interactions? Are you liable if a client falls seriously ill? And look, this question, I opened it up in my Instagram DMs and I said, hey, ask away. This was the question. This was the question that I was getting, which was I'm a stationer. I sit down with clients. I wear a mask. Sometimes they do, they don't. What if while I'm passing materials for them to feel and see, they contract COVID, they find out after me, I'm the reason they got it, and they get really sick. Am I liable? Is my business liable? Are there potential liabilities there that we should be aware of?
Yeah. So hopefully you guys, in your protection clauses that you need to have in your contract, you have something called an indemnification clause. That's kind of your first step in releasing liability or your clients indemnifying you for any third party claims. All the legal page, all of our contracts, all of our clauses have third party indemnification language because your clients are signing it, right? You could get sued from a third party. They can't control that, but they could indemnify you for third parties related to their activity or event or thing that they're hosting or participating in with you. So that's step number 1. If you have that, then you're probably pretty solid in terms of, okay, take a deep breath. I probably don't have a lot of liability, and it's not any different, you guys, than every nail tech, hair salon, restaurant, gym that's facing all of these same things, you guys. You need to remember we are one fish in a big sea of small businesses and large businesses in the United States. We're all facing COVID at the same time. I highly doubt any court is going, and there's been no case yet. That's what I'm trying to get at. We're all thinking, well, what if this happens? And what if this happens? Just take a deep breath, because even if that were to occur, the risk of you having some type of major financial liability or something like that are really nil almost. So especially if you have an indemnification clause, which I'm sure many of you do, that's one of those things that was boilerplate language in lots of people's contracts. And then Natalie, get a waiver, right? double cover yourself. If you get people sick, like they are assuming the risk of you not knowing what happened 2 days prior to the wedding that you participated in. Anyone that is basically stepping outside of their home right now is assuming the risk. I'm sure we will see case law to this effect in a few months, with probably like restaurants and those type of things, maybe gyms. And then we'll have a better answer. But for now, indemnification clause in your contract, solid. And if you don't have one, just do a waiver. And if you do have one, still do a waiver. And then you should be pretty good to go in terms of you doing everything possible. The one thing I will say as well, I kind of always, you guys can tell, like, I'm thinking of all these defenses to contracts and what the opposing like counsel would probably argue. This is my job. This is what I do. And so as I'm talking, I'm like, okay, but what could the other party like argue to that? I'm thinking here, like, what if you had like willful conduct or intentional conduct? Obviously try to avoid that, because that could be an issue. So if you like willfully did all these things and somebody like documented you hanging out with like 50 people at a backyard barbecue that had like no sanitation policies and like no one was wearing masks, don't put yourself in that situation, because you're a business owner and now you've got contract liability and things to be really, really mindful of. So just remember kind of that there's always going to be a legal caveat to what you do that would be totally against every policy and guideline and government regulation out there.
This is so good. And we're getting kind of follow-ups along the way. So I'm going to include some of those.
Yeah.
Stephanie asks, like, does this include vendor to vendor liability? So we're talking about this in the scope of vendor to client, but does this advice also kind of extend to vendor to vendor?
Yes. Most vendors are not in any way related to the other vendors. Usually it's the clients that are contracting their vendors separately. So it would be very, very, you could get on as like a co-defendant to like a large venue case. You guys, I'm just like thinking of possibilities here, but again, like just in one ear, out the other. Like that's probably not going to happen. I don't think there's any real vendor to vendor liability, except if you're a wedding planner and you kind of work with vendors and maybe you guide them through vendors, or maybe you're a part of that contract process with third-party vendors, then I would probably say you're a little bit obviously higher risk for liability there with vendor to vendor situations. And what they do that could, go beyond what the protocols are in your area. So just be mindful of that. I will say that if your wedding planner is listening, there's a big, big, big change with a lot of your guys' contracts that I have seen coming out regarding third-party vendor responsibilities, and that it probably moving forward, it would be very wise for you to have clients sign their contracts with vendors separately.
That is really good advice. I have an anonymous private question that came in that I think is actually pretty important to ask. This question is, if you are told that you're exposed to COVID, so you're not diagnosed, but you're told you've been exposed at an event and you choose to continue operating business as usual because you're not displaying symptoms, are you putting your business at risk?
Yeah, probably. Because you've been told. So again, this great question in terms of the willful, kind of malicious conduct that you would be, putting yourself in. I would, of course, communicate with your clients. The 5 to 7 days is really important right now, you guys, with CDC guidelines. Like I said, don't get off the phone with that person who's on the phone with you without telling them all of these things. Maybe make yourself a checklist in case that day does come and you do get called. Like, what are the questions I need to ask? Because once I get off the phone with them, the likelihood of you getting on the phone with another healthcare department person is like probably not going to happen, especially if it's like from your local health department, because they have other people to call. But I would definitely ask who you need to contact. Legal wise, you guys, who are you in contracts with for the next 5 to 7 days? If you have a session, I would suggest like moving that for all of you photographers or videographers out there within the 5 to 7 days that you've been notified, because most people display symptoms within 5 to 7 days. Continue looking at the CDC guidelines as well. They do get updated quite often with different findings that may occur across the United States. So you don't have to like quarantine for 14 days if you've been exposed, more or less. I believe it's 5 to 7. In terms of if you don't get symptoms, then you're probably okay. I would probably suggest as a business owner, you just go get tested if you can, just so you're putting all of those everything in place. It's like you're just double checking yourself, triple checking yourself, and inform your clients that are coming up of what's going on. You've been called on Monday, you're tested Monday afternoon. You're going to be canceling all other events and gatherings and sessions or whatever you may have that week. Because I think weddings and events I'm just kind of talking photographer speak. You guys, if you're a different vendor, you can kind of modify to your specific business. But photographer wise, like weddings and events are more important, have higher liability in terms of the contract that you've signed, the monetary amount that's going into that contract. So be mindful of what you're doing in the weeks, like the weekdays, so that your Saturdays and Sundays and your wedding days are really just you working, you taking all these protocols and procedures. And you have to inform your clients that are coming up of what happened. I'm sure many of us on this call have been in situations where we could have been exposed, but we may not know because we weren't told, or nobody knew, or we didn't know the actual time frame of that employee being at the restaurant, or so on and so forth. So we have to remember it's also assumption of the risk there. You're going to do everything you can. You're going to stay safe for the next 5 to 7 days, and then you'll be there at the wedding. You'll make sure that you are wearing a mask. And of course, if you do get symptoms, you have to inform your clients.
Yeah. And one of the threads that I keep hearing throughout this entire Q&A session is communicate, communicate, communicate. So just reminding everybody, there is an opportunity, at every stage of engagement with your clients to be communicating how you're trying to keep them safe, communicating what your guidelines and policies are, communicating even if I am to get sick, I want you to know in advance, here's how I'm going to take care of you. Here are my policies. What I'm hearing is communicate. And I just want to highlight that because I think sometimes as business owners, we can get nervous and we can, depending on our coping strategies, this is me, I'm speaking from experience, I shut down. I don't want to talk. I get nervous. We're encouraging the opposite. We're encouraging you to, step forward and be communicative. I'm seeing some advice here, Rebecca said current CDC guidelines are 5 days isolated following a negative test. So I think that's kind of in line with what we're hearing. And I would encourage everyone, as we're encouraging you to seek legal advice from a lawyer that is your attorney. Also, when it comes to these types of guidelines, just check for yourself with the CDC and verify if that is you in that situation. Yes, and followed by a negative test. Correct.
Right.
So fantastic. Now we're coming up on the close of the hour and I don't want to keep Paige too much over. And so I want to ask a question here that Marianne asked, and I'm sure other people have kind of dealt with the same thing. So Marianne asks, if a contracted client refuses to quarantine as per state orders, which to me sounds like maybe they're coming in from out of town and that state says, if you're coming in from another state with surging cases, you're required to do X, Y, Z. But they're refusing to do that. And they've already paid in advance. Marianne says she feels as though she's essentially being forced to cancel on her client. How would a cancellation policy work in that kind of situation where they're willfully not adhering to mandates from the state?
Yes, great question. This is coming up a lot right now. First thing is you cannot be forced into doing something illegal. You can be asked to do it and then choose to do it, but you can't be forced into doing it. So I would always suggest that you don't do that if you're a business owner. It's just like putting your business at way too much risk with your business license that you probably have and your permit and what have you. So I would tell them that you cannot be forced to not abide by this 14-day quarantine guideline. This is probably for like Hawaii, those type of places that have them right now. The next thing I would do is inform someone other than yourself. Don't be the one to like hold on to that information. Definitely tell the venue. I'm sure you know where this like event is taking place. Sometimes it's elopement situations, and I feel like elopement photographers and videographers are getting into some really sticky situations with this with clients who are like using very threatening words towards vendors. The one thing I would try to empower you all right now is on this, if I can give you any words of wisdom to part with, is like, you have a contract for a reason. You have a business for a reason, and you need to protect both of those that you've worked so hard to create over the past, few years or decades. And you didn't just like have them sign a contract to just like void the contract then. Or for them to like not abide by whatever these guidelines or recommendations or mandates are. And in I guess the next thing I will say is, I don't know what your language in your contract says. I can't just like look at everybody's contract is probably going to be different in terms of refunds and canceling on your client. I would try to avoid canceling on your client at all costs, because canceling on your client makes you sign a termination or cancellation agreement, and then you guys have to negotiate what's going to happen with fees paid or future payment obligations that are still due, like invoices that are due in the future. You have to hash that all out with your clients, and that just gets messy. I think a lot of us have already dealt with that and are going to continue to deal with that. So really stick to your contract as much as possible, especially if they're asking for you to not allow, like for you, they come into the state and then you host their event 2 days later. It's just not safe in all respects. So just don't do that. Maintain what your contract says. Probably don't give them a refund at that point because they're asking you to do something illegal. And I would say like, try your best to like stick to your guns and stick to your contract, even though I know clients are being really pushy. And again, we want to serve our clients so well, but you have to remember you're also serving your future clients to the best of your ability too. And if you just allow that to happen, it's going to impact all of your future clients as well. And you want to treat everyone the same in terms of what your policies are regarding that situation. I've seen people kind of do different things, and it's been getting them into some trouble with then clients finding out. And then they're like, oh, you gave a full refund to them, I want a full refund. Or, oh, you're just going to cancel, then I want to cancel too. So just be mindful and careful of that. But I am obviously such a huge proponent of contracts, that if your contract is pretty concrete in terms of them canceling or them trying to do something that would be against any state or local guideline or mandate, that you would probably be able to just say, no, I'm not attending, keep fees paid as liquidated damages, and move forward.
Okay. I know I said that was our last question, but.
Oh, it's okay. I can stay for a little bit longer.
Okay. We have one more from Nancy that we actually, we kind of like lightly touched on this, I think in our Q&A session, not our webinar, but our Q&A session. And she asks, or she states, social media extortion is huge. How do you strike a balance between honoring your contract and worrying about your brand being smeared? And we've seen this with reviews. Actually, someone else asked this earlier on in the webinar. They said, I, stuck by my contract, and then they went and wrote nasty negative reviews about my business. Right. I know it's not even really a legal question, but you're probably getting this question a lot. Do you have any advice for those of us who are a little bit afraid of like sticking by the contract and therefore then getting into messy online sentiment and conversations that may damage the business for the long term?
Yes. You guys, this is just something we're all facing right now. We're all in the same boat. We cannot tell people that they can't, like, it's just freedom of speech. They're going to do what they want to do online. Social media extortion, just like just everything, cancel culture, just like everything that's happening right now in the world. You cannot control what your clients are going to do. I think what you need to do at the get-go, if you are in a sticky client situation, you should see red flags from the beginning. Again, it's like, this is what I would tell you if like we were chatting one-on-one at a coffee shop and I was going over your contract and your specific client situation and I'm reading through emails. I'm assessing as an attorney, like, how litigious are these people? How bad could this get if they started smearing my name online? My reputation for 2021 and 2022 weddings are so important. And that ability to book thousands of dollars worth of revenue is more important than me just refunding $1,200 right now to this client, appeasing them, having them sign a cancellation contract with a waiver of claims clause in it. So important. Make sure you have that clause in your cancellation and termination contract, and a confidentiality clause too, so that you guys have agreed to, do all these things. And Natalie, what I'm saying is, if people are really fearful of that, and you are one of those vendors, totally fine. Don't let yourself get bullied or teared down on some online forum, you guys. You are the master of your own business. You have your own morals and ethics as a business owner. And if some people want to stick to their contracts, I always suggest starting there. That's why I'm saying this. Like, that's step one. And if you get to the point where you're 5 to 10, like, email communication lines down with your client, and then they're like threatening all of these things, they're getting really yucky, like, it's probably best to avoid them doing worse things to your business through word of mouth. And so potentially, like, negotiating and figuring out what you can do to resolve this situation without getting into some legal dispute down the road. I always suggest that. It's going to be emotionally and financially better for you. So yeah, that's what I would do as an attorney if I was, looking at your situation. But again, I think you really need to assess those red flags as you're working with each individual client. Some clients are going to be totally cool, totally easy to work with, totally easy to postpone, are willing to like work with all of these guidelines. We're kind of talking about that like yucky 1 to 5% of clients right now that, you guys, we opened a business. We know we're going to have to deal with them. I think we're dealing with more of them now with COVID. But that's always a decision you have to make. Ask for guidance, probably from like your closest colleagues and friends. Be very careful to put that kind of stuff in online forums, because I think it's going to overwhelm you, and it's probably going to be a harder decision to make when you get 50 different answers to that and people are telling you, you have to do this and you have to do that. There is no like one size fits all answer to a lot of these contract negotiation situations and COVID situations. So if I could tell you anything, that's what I would tell you. Be mindful, make your own decisions as a business owner. Try to come to some mutual resolution with your clients if you're in that situation. That would be best for you to avoid bad word of mouth stuff going on.
Okay, that was gold. I hope everyone just like listened to that, and that was gold. I want to highlight a couple of things. One, not sharing about it in Facebook forums, even your beloved industry groups, especially with screenshots. I just want to flag that as someone who helped to lead a 70,000 person Facebook group. We had to stop doing this. Kate's probably nodding, because it will get back to them. It is a small world. Everyone knows everyone. Just please remember that when, just as we want confidentiality from the clients in terms of what we're working on, to respect that, and whenever possible, avoid sharing that kind of conversation in those groups, because it will be reshared. It will get back to them. I've seen it happen so many times. So just reminding that. And then what Paige said, especially about asking your closest confidants and the people that you trust in your space. This is why community is so important. I also want to encourage you too, if you're working an event where other vendors are involved, Paige, would you recommend that maybe they also reach out to you if they're having like a really hard time with a client? There you go. So that's what I was hoping for. I didn't want to like put words in your mouth, but what I also was hearing was like, do that quick check-in with the venue owner and the DJ and the florist, because if you're dealing with this difficulty and you guys are on the same page about maybe what you have to do for that event, it'll just provide some clarity, and you're not the only one dealing with with that situation. I just want to say, before we close up here, we've got questions about where people can learn more about you, your shop, follow along, even like, can I pay you to send my contract? Can I hire you? Can you be my attorney? A lot of Paige love here in the chat. So before we close, could you share with everybody where they can get access to these clauses that you've created and learn more about you and follow along with all the advice that you share weekly, not just in our webinars, but guys, she's always on social, just sharing value and knowledge. So Paige, take it away.
Oh, you're so sweet, Natalie. Thank you so much for having me. You guys, I love doing this. I love just helping and sharing and giving as much wisdom and knowledge as I have. I don't have all the answers. I wish I did. But I know a lot of you had other questions in here and we could not get to them. We tried to just get to the big ones. You can always join the Legal Page community on Facebook. I don't like just like blasting join another Facebook group out there, but I love our Facebook group. We don't have a lot of that talk. I don't allow it. I monitor it pretty good. And so you can, if you have like other legal questions, that's a really good place to ask them. The reason that I always suggest that, I'm not just like join our Facebook group because we like sell things in there, which we like never do. We just answer questions because it's hard to find a safe space to ask legal questions. And we have business owners that know that that's only for legal questions and people are helping. And then me and my team can be in there to monitor and answer questions as well in a general forum, because I do have legal ethics and responsibilities where if you like send me a DM or an email that's one-on-one, I can't answer those until you are a client of mine. So I do have a virtual law firm. It's called Griffith Law. That's my last name. So it's separate from the Legal Page, and you can become a client if you want me to review contracts or do things like that. You can always reach out to my team. And I know that she posted my website, so you guys can contact my team there and they'll walk you through everything. And then I'm on the Legal Page basically everywhere. Paige, that's my first name, so it's a play on words. It's on a website, thelegalpage.com, at the Legal Page on Instagram. That's usually where you can find me the most. We have podcasts, blogs, all kinds of free resources for you all. And when you ask us questions, that facilitates a better conversation through podcasts and blogs and what's happening. We always try to keep on top of what is going on and super pertinent in the industry and your small business right now. So that's why I'm always asking for you guys to jump in our community because it really helps us as well. There is no Griffith Law website. It's just contact my team through the Legal Page. I only take on a certain amount of one-on-one clients. You guys, I'm one person and I don't have any associates or other attorneys working under me. We're working on that right now. So yeah, just contact my team and they'll let you know how it works.
Amazing. Paige, thank you so much again. This was amazing.
Yes, thank you guys so much for having me. I hope you learned a lot. And of course, reach out if you need anything else.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.